Hello again, Stephen. I'm currently in my 15th month of travel nursing, and for month 1, I've been wanting to make this video. As you know, Stephen, I started working as a nurse in North Carolina, and then I took my first travel assignment in Minnesota. And from this very first assignment, I was amazed at how different ERs could be, because in my naivete, I was kind of under the impression that there existed some sort of uniformity among ERs, kind of like if you had seen one ER, you had seen them all, but I could not have been more wrong about this. And so what I'm going to be doing is going through the ERs one at a time and kind of talking about their different quirks. But before I do that, I'm going to go through some numbers. I'm going to put everything up on the screen, and hopefully that's going to speed up the process a little bit. So here you go. As you can see, I took my first 2 jobs in North Carolina, then started traveling, like I said, in Minnesota, and then I headed over to the West Coast to Oregon, Washington, and California, and I am currently in Maryland. The biggest ER I worked at was in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and the smallest by far was in Cottage Grove, Oregon. Now we can start going through the ERs one by one. We're going to start in North Carolina, in Durham, North Carolina, and honestly, it's going to be hard to say anything bad about this ER because this was my first job. It was a medium-sized ER, very busy, very high acuity, and typically very well staffed, which was the exact opposite in terms of staffing of the next ER I went to, which was in Chapel Hill. I'm not saying I didn't like working here, I'm just saying that we never had any nurses. We were always short on nurses. So what happens in a facility like this where you're so short-staffed? Well, basically the nurses pick up all of the slack. You're picking up extra patients, extra beds, and you were responsible for all of the tasks. A lot of the nurses working at this place saw these conditions as hellish and kind of unsafe, but to be honest, it was a fantastic learning opportunity. When you work at a place like this that is so busy and so stressful, this is where you learn how to move really quickly, and this is where, most importantly, you learn how to prioritize. But I wanted to travel, and so that's what I did. Like I keep saying, my first travel assignment was in Minnesota, specifically Minneapolis, and right off the bat, the vibe at this hospital was very different to me. So this hospital was just coming off of a nurses' strike, so there was kind of a lingering animosity toward travel nurses. Logistically, this place was different because they staffed EMTs instead of CNAs. But weird of all, at least to me, was that this ER had 24/7 phlebotomy in the department. In theory, this is, supposed to speed up the process a little bit, but honestly, I don't know if it sped up the process and made things easier, or if it just added another staff member into the mix that I have to wait for them to do their job in order for things to get done. So next I headed over to the West Coast, first to Oregon. Like I said, the hospital I worked at in Cottage Grove was by far the smallest hospital that I worked at. This ER only had 8 beds, and only 7 of those were medical beds. A completely different place to work, but it was, honestly, this was one of my favorite contracts just because, this environment where you have very minimal staffing and you're responsible for so many different things was very, very unique, and it was a great learning opportunity. So next, after that, I went up to Vancouver, and honestly, I don't really have anything to say about the hospital in Vancouver because nothing really there was too unique. But honestly, it's really okay that I don't have anything to say about that hospital because the next hospital in California I have so much to say about. So I was working in an ER actually just north of San Diego in a suburb called Escondido. This ER was different than anything I had ever worked at. I'm not saying that in a bad way, I'm just saying, well, let me tell you about nurse staffing just so you kind of get an impression of how different this place was. Okay, so picture this as the ER. You have 4 pods. 3 of those are your acute care pods. In each of those 3 acute pods, you have 4 nurses running a 4-bed assignment. You also have a break nurse in each of those pods, and then you also have a resource nurse in each of those pods, which is basically responsible for tasking. And then obviously you have a charge nurse that's in charge of the whole department, but under the charge nurse you also have team leads. There are 2 team leads in the 3 acute pods, and then the 4th pod that I haven't mentioned yet, you have another team lead. Now this pod was basically the urgent care or the fast track of the department. You've got 12 beds, and you've got anywhere from 3 to 6 nurses at any one time. They like to move very quickly, so they'd overstaff this place constantly. In addition to all of that nursing staff working the ER, every shift you also have 2 specialty designated nurses. The trauma nurse, and then you also have the cardiac nurse. Now the cardiac nurse is going to be responsible for any codes, respiratory distresses, strokes, any kind of really sick patient that comes in like that. The cardiac nurse is going to go one-on-one with that patient. And so obviously the amount of staffing at this place was insane. And honestly, with all that staffing, I would bet anything that it really improves patient outcomes. It's a very nice place to work if you want a relaxing job, but I don't really see it as a place I would want to go to and have a long-term career. And so that brings us to our current assignment. Moved all the way across the country again to Clinton, Maryland, which is where I'm currently working. I love this assignment that I'm working at. Very high acuity and very much has a concept of team nursing. I'm once again in a place that's creating a fantastic learning environment for me, and I'm loving it. Okay, so I know I didn't go into tremendous detail, but that's just a little taste of the 7 different ERs that I've worked at so far. It's not even remotely comprehensive just because there are so many different ERs out there and I still have so much to see and so much to learn. Stephen, I hope that you enjoyed this video. Thank you for listening, and I will talk to you later.